All right, the last lesson of Unit 7, 1920s life, culture, and the economy. What were the causes of the booming economy of the 1920s, and how did the economy's growth alter American society? How do we live differently? Who also, though, did not share in the prosperity? That's a big question for us. In 1920, our census shows for the very first time we're very different from what we ever have been before. We're 51% living in urban areas. Moving to the big city has tipped us over the edge here, and in the 1920s, in the post-war time period, our youth, veterans for the war, farmers are really moving there for economic opportunity, adventure. Many of them have seen Paris, and there's economic stress out in the rural farming communities, and that city life appealed to them. How are you going to keep them down on the farm? Well, it's kind of the question, and a little play and musical that was big at the time that's kind of reflected here as well. And that city life, that exposure that many veterans saw and had in Paris and in some of the cities of Europe is something that drew them to the cities and city life in the United States. Our booming economy is due to multiple factors here. We'll review here at the end. Scientific management, which was written by a guy by the name of Frederick Taylor. A book written about that said that we need to look for efficiency in how we produce things to lower costs, increase production, and it really comes down to measuring exactly down to the millisecond as much as possible the process in which things are being made and how fast or how slow they're being made to try and keep that cost and that labor cost down. And Henry Ford in his assembly line is the best example of it, but it's being utilized everywhere. And efficiency is what it's all about. And he had a big impact even to the present day on production of things. In the 1920s, we owned 40% of the world's wealth. Remember that World War I kind of helps us become a lending nation instead of a borrowing nation. Our average annual income rises a significant amount over this time period. Our gross domestic product, what we turn out overall each year, increases, and income rises from about $522 to $705 a year per person. But there's going to be, of course, a big break here, and it's going to shift and go in a completely different direction by 1929, which we'll review a little bit later. Working relations with workers and workers' unions and business owners, industry owners also changes here. Work was looked at by industry owners as something that needed to be stabilized as well, and we have relations shifting here a little bit to the positive with industrialists trying to come up with safety programs, some benefit packages of various sorts, and this is called welfare capitalism. Capitalists looking out for the welfare of the workers, doing this, for example, by giving them stock in the company to try and discourage attendance or membership, rather, in unions, and to discourage strikes, and therefore, if we don't have strikes, we have greater productivity and a better working environment. And so unions, again, really were poo-pooed, and again, as we've seen before, seen as radical elements and with radical organizations with radical ideas, turning violent with those strikes, and welfare capitalism was meant to kind of slow that down. The automobile is a major driving force in this economy at the time, kind of like the internet of today. It's the backbone of the United States in the 1920s all the way to the 1970s. Really changes environment, geography, and landscape, how we live and how we move. It makes the 1920s literally roaring, and we move around more than we ever have before. Of course, it's centered in Detroit, Michigan, and we have a car culture developing here. Everything is centered around the car, and the car becomes a status symbol. This guy by the name of Henry Ford is the guy that, amongst hundreds of different car makers at the time, comes up with the process of and system of making the car cheaper so that more people can afford it. Therefore, the things that go into the car and what goes along with it later expand into the economy as well. The Model T is his first initial big hit, and then even bigger is the Model A in 1927. Henry Ford is also significant in helping production for the war effort as well, and helping win the war in that sense as well with his innovation in the assembly line, making it a moving assembly line, keeping the workers in one spot and controlling the flow of the work and the workers having to keep up. He's a pioneer employer in that he paid double of any other major industrialist out there for his workers, $5 a day. Didn't matter who it was, but he reasoned that if I'm paying them $5 a day, they're going to go out and be able to buy my car, so my money's going to come back anyway. And that was one of the requirements of working for Henry Ford. If you have a car, you better have a Ford or you don't have a job. And his assembly line makes it cheaper, and he also has a thing called interchangeable parts that helps make it very cheap to work on. And that Model A is basically, in Model T it was one model, just several variations. Largely the car is the same between all the models, and so you didn't have to put time, money into any other different kind of model of car. You just had one basic, very solid working car, and it got everybody on wheels and moving throughout the country. Paved roads, traffic lights, motels, billboards, home design, expansion of communities, growth of suburbs, gas stations, repair shops, rubber, gas, oil, shopping centers, tourism, hotels, suburbs. As I mentioned before, freedom for rural families to go into towns, to take vacations if you have a little extra money, and there was a little extra money going on here in the 1920s. Independence for people of all types. Fear of what the kids were doing in the car on their own, unsupervised, was a big concern of the 1920s. Look at all the economic activity that's going on here. Not to mention the banking and the insurance, the finance and investment that goes into these cars. There's a lot of money moving and flowing from this. And so this is a big deal. It's also a consumer economy, and there's a lot of electronic goods that are going into households that are making a difference in the economy, changing people's lives at home, reinforcing the idea, if you look at these things, home-centered kind of utility type of things, the sewing machine and washing machines, making the job supposedly easier for women, and therefore reinforcing women in the home after the war. Chain stores like Piggly Wiggly, Woolworths, growing as they had earlier in the Industrial Revolution, still around, but these being big ones of the 1920s. But all these things are transforming the home and what things are looking like there at that point in time, and supposedly making more time for women to do other things, but reinforcing their place at home. Modern advertising is big as well. It had been going on earlier in the Industrial Revolution, but now it takes on a more colorful and catchy slogan kind of a tone. Modern ad agencies are big industry and big business as well, not just here to inform you about what we have, but to associate products with famous names, famous people, associate a status with them. They hire psychologists to come up with propaganda and slogans and to help design them so that they're attractive to the eye, to get you to buy it just from a visual, verbal slogan kind of a sense. But then there's also all this buying that's happening not only because of that, but it's especially heavily happening because of installment buying, or buy it on credit. Now, people aren't really carrying around credit cards at the time, but installment buying, buy now, pay later, was heavily emphasized, and so people did that. And this is going to be an issue in the near future for us. Big topic here. Modern advertising sayings that kind of began at this time. One was called "Say It with Flowers." Doubled sales of flowers between 1912 and 1914. But all of this, buy it now, pay later, really produces a great deal of overconfidence in the sales community and people selling things, and that this prosperity is just going to go up and up and up forever. It's endless, and the demand for goods because of installment buying is really a false demand, right? And so it is all about people's ability to pay, and when they all of a sudden buy too much and they can't pay it back, that's a big problem. Significant growth also is seen in the stock market, and one of the economic fads of the 1920s was that if you had a little extra money, you need to go out and buy a stock because it's just going to go up. It's going to make you more money. You're going to become a millionaire. You can even take out a loan, which is buying on margin, come up with a little money for yourself, but take out a loan to pay off the rest. And when the stock rises, you walk away smiling, but if it falls, you're going to be in a world of hurt because you're going to owe money and you're going to lose money and maybe even lose your house or the collateral that you have to put up to purchase that stock. This is another major problem for a big event coming up in 1929 as well. So we have reckless expansion because of that and because of the other thing, buying on credit, installment buying. In the economy, who's left out in all this? old industry versus new industry. The railroads are going to start getting taken over by automobiles and trucks as competitors, and gradually over time are going to get pushed out of the economic backbone of the society. The coal industry is going to be challenged by electricity. Cotton and textiles, the southern farmers here are going to be hurt in this economy by new developments in synthetic type materials. Rayon, light, cool, very durable, very tough. Women's apparel of all types and even shoes made from this stuff. Not great for southern cotton farmers, sharecroppers who are suffering anyway. Those who are left behind, again, generally the population by the time of the 1920s eventually isn't going to be able to keep up with the cost of goods because of the demand driving up the prices. The wages don't keep up. Remember, unions don't have a lot of power. They're bad, evil. They're the Reds, they're the Socialists, they're the Communists, and there's not a lot of support for them. And most people really are living kind of on the edge. The 1920s farmers, again, as we talked about with World War I, took out a lot of loans to win the war, but when the war is done, they're stuck with those loans and prices drop because the demand for war goods drops with the end of the war as well. And so they have this debt left over and this mechanization. You see this super high-tech tractor that they've got here, about the 1920s style type of tractor. Helps them produce more, and so what does a farmer do? They just produce more. We talked about this with the populists in the early Industrial Revolution, late 1870s, 80s, and 90s. Mechanical production helps them produce more. They only know how to just produce more stuff to make up for the money they didn't make to pay the debt, and so what does that cause? Increase of supply, even greater than before. That causes the price to drop even more. People lose their farms even more. Farmers have a very, very hard time, and this was an issue in politics. There was a farm relief bill called the McNary-Haugen Farm Relief Bill that was introduced several times to keep agricultural prices high. The government basically was going to buy surplus extra crops that weren't naturally bought on the market. There's lots of competition for overseas producers in Europe here at this time, and South America as well, and we were going to somehow sell it somewhere else overseas, and that money was going to be created through a tax on food, and that is not going to happen because in our laissez-faire 1920s, Republicans who are going to basically say this is not the job and the role of government. Remember our populists back here, William Jennings Bryan, the farmers kind of wanted this kind of a thing to happen too in the 1890s. That's not going to happen. It's going to get vetoed, and farm prices will stay down, and farmers are going to suffer largely through the 1920s. But they will keep producing, and those that will survive are going to have a harder time when it gets to the 1930s, and we'll see the impact that they have on their massive production. Famous people. First really international star, we could argue here in American history is, and even in terms of international stars, is Charles Lindbergh sailing across the Atlantic non-stop for the very first time in his Spirit of St. Louis. It was basically a contest and some wealthy people putting up money out there to challenge anyone to do it for the first time. He won the $25,000 in cash and flies from the United States to Europe in doing that. And oh, by the way, he is from Little Falls, Minnesota. You can go there and see his boyhood home and look at his little toys that he has there yet today. 1920s, again, reminder, we've got significant changes socially. Women being able to vote for the very first time in the 1920 election, and this triggering also a movement, a women's equal rights movement. 1923, Alice Paul says it's not enough, having the right to vote is not enough, and she introduces that equal rights amendment that was going to be preventing any kind of discrimination based on getting a job because of your sex, so on and so forth. It's going to start there. It's going to be proposed off and on, but it begins there, and the poster child and the greatest example of societal change because of the right to vote, because of the independence that women working in the factories during World War I got, is those young women that were working there, is the flapper lifestyle and the flapper woman that is characteristic of the 1920s, challenging the norms of what women should or should not do. working outside the home more often, making their own money, being independent, doing all of these things. Very, very offensive to conservative fundamentalist America, as we talked about before. They sent a message to many that America was going the wrong direction of becoming a nation of immoral people, and society and family is going to fall apart as a result. However, for others, it was, again, a liberation of women in society and greater freedom for women in society. And one of the significant names, also the 1920s, that's important to know is a gal by the name of Margaret Sanger. In 1916, she published a book called What Every Girl Needs to Know. It becomes kind of a little blue book for girls in terms of growing up and, what you need to know as a woman in terms of your body and what's going on with your growth and things like that. And she, in the 1920s, opens up a family planning and birth control clinic in Brooklyn. It gets shut down right away because in 1973 there was a series of laws passed by Congress called the Comstock laws that basically detailed a lot of bans on the distribution of lewd or what is considered pornographic or immoral material, and birth control fit right into that. And birth control wasn't something that was advocated by many religious groups, or religion was banned in many states, for example. She argued that suffrage was unimportant without women owning control of their bodies and reproduction process. And so that issue of birth control and reproduction for women comes right about this point in time as well. In 1921, she founds the American Birth Control League. In 1921, it eventually becomes Planned Parenthood, which is a major issue in today's politics, and whether or not it should have funding from the federal government. That starts in about 1942, and she was put in jail numerous times for what she was spreading around in pamphlets and writing about and talking to people about, and often had to run to, at least once, went away to England to kind of save herself a little bit. Mass media in the 1920s got its boost and got a big bump from its efforts to promote the war effort in World War I. Movies start pumping out films left and right all over the place, black and white. They were all largely silent until 1927. We had the jazz singer, the first talkie, being produced at that time, in which Al Jolson is in character as blackface and portrays African Americans in the singing industry. They're a very racist film there. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Radio 1920s, KDKA was the first commercial broadcast in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. By 1923, there's hundreds of stations, so we have a connection of the country across, increasing significantly here because of radio and that technology. That's going to be very important into the future in terms of government sending out messages about what the government is doing. Mr. FDR and the Depression in World War II. Sports and fads all over the place. We sought to entertain ourselves not only through movies, but baseball games. Baseball was the sport by far. There are others. There's football and college football and some semi-professional football leagues out there, kind of thing. But baseball is it, and of course the Big Bambino is one of the most important ones at the time. Mahjong, crossword puzzles, flagpole sitting, and that is literally it. If you look on YouTube for flagpole sitting, you'll see some crazy things there. Dance marathons, dance till you drop, the Charleston dance. We'll take a look at an example of that, what that looks like. It's very freewheeling and wide open kind of entertainment. So we also have a significant amount of what's going on in people's minds and what they feel like post-World War I in response to World War I seen here in writing. And a lost generation of writers is very important to know. And these were individuals who were born in the 1890s. They fought in World War I. They're disillusioned. Very important here, maybe to annotate in your notes here. They're also disillusioned, and what they write expresses that disillusionment and dissatisfaction with American culture and values. And they highlight, as a theme, the selfishness, the materialistic nature of how the Americans are living, and a cynical attitude about World War I, in the sense of Ernest Hemingway himself fought in World War I as a young man, these being two of his key books. And if you want to go see where his home is, there's your route. Go to Key West, and where he lived, loved to fish, loved cats. You can go see some of the cats, the ancestors of his cats are still there. Major writer at the time. Other major writers, F. Scott Fitzgerald, 1925, also wrote about materialism and excess. You've seen Great Gatsby, many of you. If not, you're going to see it very soon. The current day version and also the version, I believe, 1978 with Robert Redford portraying that book. Significant piece of work there as well. Another significant writer is a guy by the name of Sinclair Lewis from another Minnesota theme here in today's lesson. Born in Sauk Center, Minnesota, west of Minneapolis, St. Paul. He wrote a book called Main Street, and it was basically about his small little town, critical of small town life and views that clashed with urban liberal thinking, exemplified here in a city gal from St. Paul that travels there and lives there with a love connection involved, but for a Nobel Prize that he wins, he's well known as for a book called Babbitt. And again, having that kind of a cynical view of American thinking and views at the time. One of the important and most significant things that has an impact in the 1920s again is that Great Migration, and that Great Migration is connected to not only, of course, violence and race riots, Red Summer 1919, but also the Harlem Renaissance. African Americans moving into northern cities and looking for those wartime jobs. After the wartime jobs go away, there's problems, of course, but they settle in some of the major cities in the north, and in particular Harlem, New York is a very upscale, happening place where there are African American writers and artists that basically set up a life and a lifestyle there for themselves and write about African American experience in novels and poems and short stories. And it's kind of here where they write about and encourage and foster a new pride and an identity for African Americans and reinforce the importance of African American culture and those African Americans as a people. And it's a place where, of course, we have lots of music and culture being expressed, importantly through poetry. The most important writer of the time, I would say, is Langston Hughes, a poet who said that, during the Harlem Renaissance, the Negro is in vogue, was important all of a sudden, and was having an impact, and again reinforced the importance of their people and the value of them, whereas society, of course, was denigrating them and placing them and still trying to keep them and keeping them in a level of low standing in society, especially in the South, but also in the North. But African American music and ragtime mixes here in the North with Northern music, and it's developing this thing called jazz. And its roots are in African music and methods of singing and styles of song and dance and that kind of thing. Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Bessie Smith. It's very improvisational. It spreads into radio, the medium of the time, and to records, and people in the North hear it and they take to it very readily, and gradually this is going to change and evolve over time, and pretty soon we're going to have ragtime swing music evolving out of this, and in the 1950s we'll see Mr. Elvis Presley and that rock and roll phenomenon come up. But in terms of African American identity changing here and being emphasized here, there's a guy we're going to look at by the name of Marcus Garvey, and in some primary documents we're going to take a look at why is he, who is he, and why is he so controversial. When we look at the end of World War I, with African Americans serving the war, not really getting a chance to fight right away, but they do fight, and coming back, they're thinking that, having served, they'll get increased rights and better treatment back home. It doesn't happen. It results in race riots in 1919, as we mentioned before, Red Summer 1919. It results in African American activism and an activist movement that happens here in the 1920s. That coincides with our Harlem Renaissance. Those that have some money, they are, because of World War I and moving to northern jobs and northern communities, getting a little more money. There are some African Americans who are increasingly in the middle class or lower middle class of people, doctors, lawyers, becoming more educated, and they are organizing themselves into political organizations like the National Association for Colored People. It increases the membership because of what had recently and what had happened and what was happening. rise in the American Civil Liberties Union to membership to try and take to court, go through the political process to challenge the laws of segregation, Jim Crow, discrimination, and violence against African Americans to make the change there. And Marcus Garvey represents that he is going to foster black nationalism, separatism, self-sufficiency, and influence people in the 1960s. There might be a couple groups or individuals that you might think of when you see nationalism, separatism, self-sufficiency. Very important in the legacy that he leaves later on. But you're going to read about it in some documents here. Again, and this should go in your notebook here, bottom half of your left-hand side. Who is Marcus Garvey? Why is he so controversial? We're going to look at a little bit of a piece in the textbook as to what it is about him that's controversial, and then we're going to look at some primary documents and a timeline of events, look at the background, look at the context of things, and with that, write a response in your notebook left-hand side. What is it about him that is so controversial? There's going to be a graphic organizer to help you with this as well. Who are the sources? What's the context of the time? What's driving what they're thinking? Why are they saying what they're saying? And what happens to this guy, Marcus Garvey? So there's our essential question again. Make sure you do a little review on the left-hand side. This could be a little chart that you could add here that kind of reviews the economy and what's driving it in terms of general things going on out there in the economy, as well as what is driving it in terms of, Henry Ford and the automobile, and then, of course, who is left out in all this at the same time. Good day.